My daughter stood tall in front of neighbors and reporters, smiling proudly as she claimed the $68 million lottery ticket that I had purchased myself. Then she turned around and told me to pack my things and leave her house. My chest ached, but I swallowed the pain. Years of sacrifice had already taught me how to survive silence. That very night, I began collecting every receipt, every record, knowing the truth would one day speak louder than her lies. And believe me, that was only the beginning of a storm neither she nor her husband ever saw coming. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The house smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary, a scent that should have wrapped me in comfort. Instead, it felt like a veil masking words I wasn't meant to hear. From the kitchen doorway, I caught Celine's laughter as she stood with two of her friends. She waved her wine glass like she was conducting a symphony, her voice light and sharp at once. Sometimes I joke, she said, that I'm renting space to my tenant downstairs. Tenant. The word landed like a pebble in my chest, small but heavy enough to sink. Her friends chuckled politely, sipping their glasses. None of them looked toward the doorway where I stood half-hidden, clutching the dish towel as though it were a shield. My tongue pressed against my teeth, holding back a response. Instead, I folded the towel neatly, set it down, and swallowed the sting. If I let every barb pierce me, I would be nothing but wounds. I turned away, stepping into the quiet of my small living space. Downstairs. That was how they referred to it, though I had once called it a basement. My refuge, my corner. 4 walls painted beige, one lamp buzzing in the corner, and the hum of the furnace that never quite silenced. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and let the silence fill me. Tenant, I whispered into the empty room. I raised this girl. I carried her on my hip while stirring soup sang to her when storms rattled the windows and clapped the loudest at every school concert. I had stitched her dresses by hand when money was thin work, double shifts to pay her college fees. All of it blurred now, erased with one word that stripped me from mother to tenant. It wasn't just a joke. It was the language of distance, of disowning disguised as humor, and I felt it carve a hollow inside me. Later that afternoon, Orville knocked lightly on the doorframe, leaning in without waiting for an answer. His tone was smooth, too smooth. "Hey, Marjorie," he said, using my name instead of Mom. He always did. "I just wanted to check if you're comfortable downstairs. The heat, okay, lighting all right." He smiled casual, but his eyes darted away quickly. It wasn't concern, it was reconnaissance. I could sense it. Like he was testing the waters, setting the stage for something else. The way one might ask a tenant if the unit was livable before pushing them out altogether. "Yes," I said simply. "It's fine." I matched his casual tone, though. Inside my pulse ticked faster. I had learned that silence could sometimes protect better than confrontation. He nodded satisfied and walked away, whistling, leaving me with the echo of his question. Comfortable downstairs. That phrase would rattle in my bones long after he left. Evening came, and with it the creak of the mail slot. When I bent to gather the envelopes, a folded set of papers slipped free. Not bills, not letters, plans, architectural sketches printed on stiff white paper. Curiosity urged me to unfold them, and when I did, the words at the top screamed louder than any insult. Basement renovation, elderly guest quarters. My hands trembled. My eyes scanned the lines. Partition walls, a smaller kitchenette, labeled storage space. Every stroke of ink confirmed what I already feared. I wasn't simply downstairs. I was being relegated, assigned a corner of my daughter's house, like a boarder, not blood. Elderly guest. That's what I had become. I pressed the papers to my chest, then slid them back into the envelope before anyone could see. My cheeks burned with humiliation. That night, I sat at the family table as though nothing were wrong. Celine spoke brightly about future renovations, her fork clinking against her plate. She didn't look at me once. Orville nodded along, adding details about paint colors, open concepts, and modern finishes. The air was thick with a pretense I refused to pierce. I ate quietly, each bite like ash in my mouth. My silence was a mask, a curtain shielding the storm inside me. If I spoke, it would not be with laughter or casual tone. It would be with the fury of betrayal, and I wasn't ready to unleash that yet. After dinner, I returned to my small room. I sat on the bed, back straight, hands folded, and let the quiet wash over me again. Even in my own daughter's house, I had become invisible. The living room was warm with the hum of the heater and the soft glow of Celine's lamps. She sat curled on the couch, balancing her wine glass, while Orville leaned back in his chair with his phone resting lazily in his palm. I sat in the armchair nearest the window, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the shadows flicker across the carpet. Celine smiled too brightly, her words floating into the air like perfume that tried too hard to please. "We've been talking about some renovations," she said casually, her voice laced with the sweetness she reserved for outsiders, not for me. "It'll really improve things for everyone, open up the space, make it more modern." Her tone was polite, but every syllable carried an edge. I could feel it like a draft sneaking under the door. She framed it as if it were a gift for us all, but the way she avoided my eyes told me the truth was buried underneath. I sat quietly listening, nodding when expected, my face calm, though the air pressed heavy against my chest. Later, as I walked past the kitchen, I heard the low murmur of voices. The clink of glasses had faded, replaced by whispers wrapped in the cover of the refrigerator's hum. I stopped just outside the doorway, the shadows of Celine and Orville flickering against the tiled wall. "She won't even notice once we move her downstairs." Celine whispered, her tone clipped, as if the plan were already written in stone. "She'll adjust." Orville added, almost bored, as though I were a piece of furniture to be shifted. "We'll make it sound like a favor." My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, carefully pressing my spine against the wall. Their words cut sharper than any knife, so simple, so thoughtless, yet designed to strip me of dignity. I swallowed the sound loud in my ears, then turned away. I moved quietly down the hall, each step measured each beat of my heart, louder than the last. I reached my room and closed the door, holding the knob a second longer than necessary, as if sealing the betrayal outside, but it had already seeped in. I stood at the window, staring into the yard where the branches swayed in the cold evening wind. Once this house had been my fortress, filled with echoes of laughter and the scent of Sunday dinners. The kitchen was where Selena painted her school projects, the living room where she played piano until her fingers ached. Every corner carried my labor, my sacrifice. Now those same walls had turned against me. The glass panes reflected a woman older than I felt, inside someone being quietly folded out of the picture. The words "move her downstairs" echoed, circling in my chest. I was no longer the heart of the home. I was a burden carefully being repositioned out of sight. The darkness outside pressed closer to the glass, swallowing the garden where I once planted roses. I pressed my palm to the window pane, letting the cold seep into my skin, grounding me in the loneliness that had become my companion. At dinner, the clatter of utensils filled the silence more than words did. Celine's voice carried cheer that felt practiced, each sentence a brushstroke over something she hoped I wouldn't notice. "You'll love the changes," she said, her fork poised midair. "It'll make the house so much better. More room, more light." I tilted my head slightly, offering a gentle smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Basement plans sound exciting," I said lightly. "Who's moving in?" For a moment, the room froze. Celine's fork clinked softly against her plate as she set it down too quickly. A beat passed before she lifted her chin, her lips curving into a smile that looked more like a mask. "Oh, just, making it flexible." "For guests," she chirped. Orville cleared his throat, fumbling. "Yes, for guests, just in case family visits or—" He stopped short, his gaze darting to Selena for reassurance. I sipped my water, my face, calm, my silence sharper than accusation. I let them breathe, let them recover, while inside me a new ledger of evidence grew longer. Back in my room, the quiet returned like an old friend. I sat at the small desk, opened the worn notebook I kept hidden in the drawer, and picked up my pen. My hand trembled, but my words came steady. "They want me unseen," I wrote slowly. "They think silence will erase me, that shadows can contain what they don't wish to face." Each line carved itself into the page, proof that I would not let their whispers define me. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm against its cover, feeling the weight of my own resolve beneath it. My chest felt heavy, but in the weight was also strength. I knew now I must stay alert, that my silence was not weakness, it was preparation. That night I lay awake, the ceiling above me faintly glowing from the streetlight outside. The house creaked in familiar rhythms, but it no longer comforted me. I could feel the plans shifting above me, decisions being drawn and redrawn in rooms I was no longer welcome to enter. The words I overheard played again and again, a haunting refrain. "She won't even notice." But I noticed. Every glance, every whisper, every paper left carelessly on the counter built a mosaic of truth they thought I was too blind to see. They see me as an inconvenience to be stored away. I thought my chest rising with quiet defiance. They have no idea what that invisibility is teaching me. The paper slid across the table toward me with a whisper. Celine's manicured nails tapped once against the edge before she pulled her hand back, her smile taut, businesslike. I unfolded the sheet carefully, already sensing the weight of what it contained. "Just to make things clear," she said, her tone pleasant enough to pass for kindness. "Here's what we figured would be fair. Everyone should contribute, right?" The columns blurred for a moment before my eyes settled on the numbers. Electricity, groceries, water, gas, even a line for miscellaneous household improvements. At the bottom, the total matched almost exactly the pension check I received each month, the one that kept me afloat since my husband passed. My throat tightened, but I forced my face still. To her, it was nothing more than math, a balance sheet she could present without guilt. To me, it was a quiet eviction, written in digits, a reminder that even in my daughter's house, I had been reduced to a ledger entry. I folded the page neatly, slipped it into my lap, and nodded once. Back in my room, I opened my notebook and copied each line onto a fresh page. The numbers stared back at me cold and unyielding. I tallied my contribution, not just the check she expected, but the hours spent cooking, the scrubbing of floors, the laundry folded and tucked into drawers. I wrote them down like debts owed invisible currency. No one else seemed to count. My hand shook as I added the columns, but the sum was clear. I was paying like a tenant while working like unpaid staff. The insult wasn't in the arithmetic, but in the erasure of everything beyond it. I closed the book slowly, pressing my palm against its cover as though to seal the truth inside. Silence was safer than protest, but the ink on the page screamed loud enough for me. The day of the dinner party arrived with the house buzzing under Selena's commands. She barked instructions while checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, leaving me to scrub countertops, chop vegetables, and polish glasses until my back ached. Orville darted in and out, carrying cases of wine, his voice lifting, only to ask where I'd set the corkscrew. I moved like a shadow, wiping, stirring, arranging the rhythm of work, masking the churn in my chest. Hours passed, yet not once did Selene offer thanks. Instead, she turned as the first guests arrived and said lightly, "Just make sure you stay in the background tonight, okay?" Her words landed harder than the stack of plates I carried. I forced a smile, nodded, and carried on. By evening, the dining table gleamed, candles flickered, and the laughter of strangers filled the air. I stood at the edge apron dusted with flour hands still raw from scrubbing, watching Selene glide among her guests like the perfect hostess. Balancing a tray of hors d'oeuvres, I slipped quietly through the living room, careful not to interrupt the flow of conversation. That was when her words sliced through the hum of voices. "It's like having live-in help," Selene said brightly, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "except she pays us." Laughter erupted sharp and effortless, spilling over glasses of wine. I froze mid-step, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. The shrimp cocktails rattled against the crystal as heat rose up my neck. I stared at the floor, every laugh a nail hammered into my chest. The guests saw me only as the punchline, not as the woman who had built this house of memories, brick by brick. I forced my body to remain still, my expression neutral, though inside the words echoed like cruel bells. Live in help. Pays us. A humiliation wrapped in humor served like another course. I left the tray on the nearest table and turned toward the stairs. My steps were deliberate, heavy but controlled, carrying me away from the glow of candles and the chorus of laughter. Each step up felt like reclaiming a fragment of dignity they hadn't yet stripped away. In the quiet of the hallway, the noise of the party muffled into a distant hum. I straightened my shoulders, pressing my hand against the banister, steadying myself against the tremor of anger and sorrow that fought to spill free. Silence, I reminded myself, could sometimes be the last barrier between pride and ruin. So I carried it with me like armor. Each breath measured each step, a declaration that I would not let them see me shatter. Later that night, with the house still echoing faint laughter downstairs, I sat at my desk and opened the notebook once more. The page welcomed the words like a confidant, exploited but not broken. I wrote my pen, pressing deep grooves into the paper. They believe silence is surrender, but silence can be strategy. If silence is the cage they build for me, then silence will be the place I sharpen my keys. I closed the book, slid it back into the drawer, and sat in the stillness of my small room. The night pressed against the window, but in its darkness, I felt the faint glow of my own resolve beginning to burn. Snow sifted past the kitchen window like torn lace the first of the season. Celine arranged a charcuterie board as if it were a magazine, spread turning grapes until their best sides faced up. Orville, planted on the sofa, clicked through College Games volume, just loud enough to claim the room. I rinsed plates in the sink and dried them with the good towel, the one I bought years ago, the one she calls hers now. Each time I stepped in, the air tightened as if my presence changed the recipe. "Mom, could you move that platter?" she asked without looking. I shifted left, then right, then ended where I began. Outside, the light thinned to pewter. Inside, small talk bumped along like a cart with one bad wheel. Selene dabbed honey along the edge and said it would make the figs shine. I remembered warming plates for Sunday roasts. Warmth made everything kinder. Here, kindness had edges, knives aligned coasters, centered smiles clipped. I wiped a crumb that wasn't there and kept moving. I carried the empty tray to the laundry room and set it on the washer, far from the curated talking. The house hummed with the dryer and the distant announcer. I let my shoulders drop just once. Language is a sly decorator. It moves a chair an inch, hides a rug's fray, renames a mother a tenant. I opened my notebook and fingered the crease where I keep old grocery lists. Milk bread stamps kindness. Once it was simple, a daughter, a kitchen, a Sunday. Now I count how often I am asked to be useful and how rarely I am invited to belong. No one sees a ledger in my face, only the quiet that keeps the room smooth. I think about the years I worked double shifts at clinic, the nights I drove through hail to pick Celine up from practice. Every mile had a purpose: get her home, keep her safe, teach her brave. Bravery has been remodeled into convenience. I close the notebook and breathe. Quiet. By afternoon, the doorbell rang and Celine's laughter brightened as she waved her friends in. I tied on an apron and began the ordinary ballet rinse, chop, stir, set, repeat. The oven breathed rosemary and citrus. I cleaned the good glasses, the ones from my old house carried here in newspaper, and silence. "Mom, stay in the background, okay?" Celine said, cheerful as a sign. I smiled and nodded, then lifted a tray of crostini as if it were neutral as weather. The day moved quick, busy hands disguising busier thoughts. I wiped counters, folded napkins, straightened chairs that had not moved. As the first coats piled on the entry bench, I checked the guest bath, lit the candle, and hid the plunger behind the towels. People notice small mercies when they need them. Until then, they see right through. I refilled water pitchers, buffed a dull fork to a shy shine, and set small labels by cheeses I could not afford. Someone wanted a photo. I lifted the phone, framing Selene and her friends under the wreath. The timer chimed. I slipped back to the stove and kept the air sweet. Indeed, yes. I was carrying a tray of sparkling water when I heard it not shouted, but tossed like confetti. Selene laughed to her friend by the mantel, a pretty sound with a sharp edge. "It's like having live-in help," she said, tilting her glass. "Except she pays us." Laughter gathered like sleet on a windshield. I stood in the doorway, tray steady, heart not. No one turned. No one needed to. The words had already done their work, drawing lines on the floor that told me where to stand. Humiliation has a taste metal and mint, as if even your breath apologizes. I lowered the tray to the coffee table and arranged the coasters. Then I picked up 2 empty plates and walked out as if I were simply doing my job. Down the hall, the framed photos watched graduations, one wedding a baby in a knit hat. In each, I am the one holding coats, straightening collars, making room. I paused by the thermostat and let my face return to still water. This is how glass meets winter. It does not complain. It bears. Yet I closed the guest room door and leaned against it, counting to 5, the way I taught Selene when monsters were only in closets. A small knock answered. Leora slipped in, sock feet whispering on the rug. "Grandma, will you still read to me tonight?" she asked, eyes big as coins in a fountain. "Of course," I said, and patted the bed. We read the old book about a lighthouse that never sleeps. My voice found its tide again. She tucked her head under my arm, and the storm outside grew gentle enough to hear the page turn. Before she left, she pressed a sticker into my hand, a crooked star from a school sheet. "For you," she said, "to make your room bright." We listened to the heater click and hum the house, pretending at warmth. I said the lighthouse shone even when no boats were near. Its job was guidance, not applause. She nodded. I promised my lamp would stay lit as long as she needed the way. Yet after lights were out and the house settled into televisions and dishes, I cleared a corner of the desk. I opened my notebook and began a list, neat as invoices, dates, paid groceries, bought hours, watched miles driven. I added names of contractors I'd overheard and the words they used, efficient downstairs transition. I sketched the hallway like a map and marked the places where I kept things running, the things that break themselves when no one notices. The wound became a map, and tomorrow I would start following it. Proof will live on this page. Dinner smelled like rosemary and expectation. The table was set with the china from my old house, the one Selene calls vintage, when friends admire the pattern. Orville talked about joist hangers while he sawed his pork chop with the focus he saves for game day. I kept my fork moving, one bite, one breath, the rhythm of someone who knows the room is a stage and her chair is a taped mark. Selene skimmed safe topics, holiday lights, the weather sales at the hardware store, until her smile fixed into that careful brightness that means she is steering. "It's time we make this home work for everyone," she said, smoothing her napkin like a contract you sign by eating quietly. I asked for the salt. I did not say that footprints show who was told to follow. After plates were cleared, Selene slid a leather folder onto the table, like a dealer with a winning hand. Tabs, renderings, a budget, and tidy columns. She opened to a page labeled Lower Level Suite. A narrow sitting room, a kitchenette the size of a hotel cart, a bed tucked under a window that looked more like a slot. "Your own private space downstairs," she chirped. Orville nodded on cue. "Separate entrance. Total independence." I traced a line of tiny measurements, all subtraction. Private is a generous word when the door you are offered narrows your life to a corridor. This isn't an offer, I thought not out loud, but in the place where truth meets spine. It was an instruction wrapped as kindness, a demotion printed in pretty fonts. I set my palm flat on the table and felt the oak remember me. The doorbell rang. Dessert guests, Glenda from 2 houses down, and her husband Pete stepped in with a pie, and the appetite neighbors bringed news. Coffee was poured. Selene rehearsed her pitch with a host's brightness. "Mom will have her own space," she said, "her little kingdom downstairs." Orville chuckled. more like a cozy dungeon suite. Laughter flickered around the table, gentle as paper cuts. Glenda asked about tile and moisture barriers. I excused myself to check the kettle. In the hallway mirror, I found my face and adjusted nothing. I am still here. I told the reflection that used to soothe other people, and tonight it would have to soothe me. I remembered the day they had me sign the household share sheet, the total matching my check to the dollar. Orville called it fair. Fairness would count the sinks. I leave empty the lunches, I pack the rides before sunrise. At dinner, Selene pointed at noise mitigation and joked, "We'll barely hear you." Laughter answered. Back from the kettle, Glenda traced the drawing. "Efficient," she said. Pete added, "and safe." I wanted to ask whose safety they meant, but pie was served, and the script did not include my questions. In my room, I stacked receipts under an elastic band. The numbers formed a narrow ladder. On a sticky note, I wrote 3 calls for Monday and slid it into the diary like a small anchor. Snow hissed. Below Orville mentioned timelines. Celine murmured, "Soon." I let the word pass like a train that does not stop here. The guest room felt like a shoreline after a storm-damp air grit only I would sweep. I opened the top drawer for tissues and my fingers brushed old paper. Under sweaters wrapped in a faded church bulletin lay Harlan's diary. The leather had softened to the shape of his hands. I sat on the bed and opened to the ribboned page. His neat script dated the week after his second surgery. "If they ever treat you less than your worth, remember what we built and what is still yours." The words arrived like light through shutters, cutting clean lines through the dim. I read another entry about the year Celine broke her wrist, and I slept upright in a chair for 3 nights so she wouldn't wake alone. Down the hall, laughter rose and fell. Plates touched porcelain. A spoon chimed a cup. The house went on with its small music while I let the sentence in his diary set bone, where humiliation had tried to break it. I placed the book on the nightstand. Its weight rearranged the room the way a lighthouse beam rearranges a harbor without moving a single stone. Breathe in for 4, out for 6. The counselor taught me when grief turned lungs into chores. The floor steadied. Outside, snow began to stitch the yard into one quiet piece. Later, when the sink finally quieted, I opened my notebook. I copied Harlan's line onto the first page in fresh ink. Under it, I listed numbers I had begun to gather payments, hours of childcare, grocery totals, miles driven, medications fetched. I added the names of contractors Selena mentioned, dates and times, and the phrases that gave the plan away, optimized transition downstairs. On a clean line, I wrote, "I am not storage." The sentence steadied the air. Snow ticked against the window like a metronome that owed the house nothing. I stood at the window and touched the cold glass. My reflection touched back not a tenant, not a project, not a convenient corner to be repurposed. Some basements are poured in concrete and some are poured in language. Either way, you do not move there without agreeing to the smallest version of yourself. Agreement is not my language. I turned off the lamp and let the dark tell the truth. The day had demoted me on paper. The night returned what paper couldn't hold. I pressed my palm over my heart as I used to calm Celine's when fever spiked. Warmth tells the body it remains. I steadied my breaths. Their basement could never contain my voice or my value. The first week of January began with frost on the windows and silence in the house, the kind of silence that comes after too many unspoken words. I brewed coffee, the familiar scent grounding me in the swirl of everything that had already happened. My hands curled around the mug, warming fingers stiff with age. The television hummed in the background, the anchor's voice brisk. A record-breaking $68 million lottery win was claimed this morning, right here in Iowa. I froze. The camera cut to images of the lottery office. My eyes darted toward the fridge where I'd once taped a ticket beneath a magnet shaped like a sunflower, the one I had bought more out of habit than hope. I felt my stomach dip. Footsteps rushed from upstairs. Selene face-flushed phone, buzzing in her hand like it couldn't contain its own excitement. She barely looked at me before blurting, "Mom, you won't believe this," but her excitement wasn't the kind that shares, it was the kind that takes. By mid-morning, the living room was a stage. Celine, in her brightest sweater, called in neighbors and even a few friends who lived down the block. Orville stood behind her like a co-star. They raised glasses of orange juice and spoke with the bravado of new royalty. "We're the winners," Celine announced, clutching the ticket like a sacred text. Laughter, applause, gasps. And then she said it, the phrase that sealed the betrayal. "Our ticket, our future." My chest tightened. It wasn't our, it was mine. I remembered the quiet Tuesday when I'd stopped at the gas station, bought groceries, and tacked the slip of paper to the fridge, thinking maybe luck could sit there quietly until it was needed. To hear her parade it as hers before the neighbors before me was like being erased in public daylight. I kept my lips pressed together because sometimes silence is the only defense that doesn't break you further. By noon, the driveway filled with strangers carrying cameras. Reporters leaned over the fence, snapping photos, calling Celine's name, as though she had grown into someone larger than life overnight. She soaked in the attention, waving with exaggerated grace, rehearsing lines that made her sound generous. "I'm just the lucky daughter providing for her family," she told them, tilting her head in that practiced way. Flashbulbs sparked. Her voice dripped with false modesty. I stood behind her on the porch, a shadow cast by her performance. One reporter pointed at me, then turned back to Celine. "Is that your mom?" She didn't answer, didn't even turn her head. I could have been the mail carrier or the woman next door, invisible again, framed in every photo as background clutter. The shame felt heavier than the January chill. That evening, I sat in the den as the news replayed the scene. This time, the anchor's tone carried a hook. Ownership of the winning ticket remains under review. The lottery office has not confirmed the claim. The words tightened the air in the room. Celine, who had been celebrating with champagne, stiffened. Orville's phone pinged endlessly. A neighbor's voice floated from the kitchen, uncertain now. "So, do you really have it?" Selena shushed her, forced a smile, but I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I hid my own smile, small and private. For the first time, there was a crack in their certainty. The truth has a way of seeping through, even if the liars speak louder. Days later, the house vibrated with anger. Orville slammed cabinet doors, swore under his breath. They froze the account until it settled. He spat, pacing across the kitchen tiles. Celine's face was drawn tight red patches, rising on her cheeks as she hissed into her phone, trying to control a story slipping from her grip. "They can't do this," she muttered. "It's ours." I stood at the counter, quietly jotting notes in my small spiral notebook date. Of announcement words used ticket origin, her claim versus mine. Each entry was a stone stacked against their shaky tower. Panic coursed through them like fire, but for me, calm had finally returned. They were rattled. I was not. When the house emptied and night pressed in, I sat alone in my room, the quiet humming like a promise. I looked at my notebook at the careful lines where I had begun recording the facts they tried to bury. "You took my name off the story," I whispered into the dark. The diary on the nightstand. Harlan's words, still fresh, seemed to answer back with its silent weight. I closed my eyes and let the thought steady me. But the story isn't over. The evening sat heavy on the house, thick with a silence that felt unnatural after days of tense whispers and slammed doors. Dinner had ended in mechanical clinks of silverware. No laughter, not even the shallow small talk they once forced at the table. I carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it clean, then slipped away to my room. Harlan's diary rested on my lap, its pages already worn from nights of seeking refuge in his words. Downstairs, I could sense something brewing a storm trying to form in the air. The quiet was not peaceful. It was the pause before thunder. I pressed my fingers against the paper, steadying my breath, waiting. Through the vents, the first sharp words cut through like the strike of a match in dry grass. Celine's voice tight and clipped. "You should have filed the documents right the first time." Orville's reply came fast, bitter. "Don't you dare pin this on me. You wanted everything too fast, too loud." Their words tangled in accusation, each syllable sharper than the knives still drying in the kitchen rack. I leaned closer to the vent heart, steady but curious. Vindication threaded through me like a hidden current. Finally, the cracks I had long felt beneath the surface were making themselves heard aloud. For years they had spoken as one voice, a fortress built of rehearsed lines. Now it fractured. The kitchen soon erupted into chaos. Cabinet doors slammed, plates rattled like cymbals in a violent symphony. Celine's voice rose shrill with fury. "You've ruined everything." Orville's shout answered raw and unguarded. "This was your obsession, not mine." A crash followed the sound of something fragile shattering on tile. My breath caught, not in fear, but in grim satisfaction. For the first time, the fortress of control they had built around me, above me, against me, was crumbling under its own weight. Orville stormed out to the porch door, banging so loud it echoed into the night. Celine remained inside her sobs, muffled by slamming doors, rage echoing against walls meant to contain me. Their unraveling was a storm I did not have to summon. It arrived on its own. I moved to the upstairs window, careful not to be seen. Outside, on the sidewalk, dusted with winter frost, neighbors had gathered. 2 women in coats pulled tight, leaned toward each other, whispering. A man shook his head, glancing at the porch, where Orville now smoked furiously, his gestures wild in the glow of the street lamp. Celine's shouts carried through the thin air enough for every ear nearby to catch. Reputation, the polished mask she cherished, was slipping like snow melting too soon. Each word that escaped their lips became its own witness, carried by the cold January air into the ears of a community that had once admired their calm facade. I watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing their stage performance was unraveling without a single word from me. Back in my room, I opened my notebook. The pages already bore witness to weeks of careful notes, dates, words, deeds. Tonight I added a line that felt heavier than all the others. They crumble without my silence breaking a word. I set down the pen and looked at my reflection in the window pane. The face staring back was lined with years of sacrifice and endurance, but tonight those lines felt less like scars and more like map lines leading toward freedom. I considered the power of waiting, of letting them rot from within, before I stepped into the light with the truths I carried. Before bed, I stood in front of Harlan's photo framed and steady on the nightstand. His eyes caught in that frozen smile seemed to watch me as though he'd been waiting for this very moment. "You said their power would rot itself," I whispered softly, pressing my hand against the frame. "It's happening." The words settled over me like a blanket, not warm but resolute. I turned off the lamp, lay down, and let the storm rage downstairs without me. The house felt thinner that evening, as if the drywall itself had been listening for weeks and finally ran out of patience. I folded towels on my bed, small squares, then long rectangles the way I learned in a duplex kitchen 40 years ago, when Harlan and I were teaching ourselves how to be a family. Down the hall, Celine rehearsed her bright public voice. "We've been so blessed," she tried, then cleared her throat. "We intend to be generous." Her words had the shine of a showroom floor, slick, but not steady. I kept my door half closed and let quiet do what it does best, reveal what noise tries to hide. A soft scuff touched the hallway. Not a knock shoes, deciding whether to go forward. I opened the door to Mrs. Gallagher from next door, a foil-covered plate in both hands. She has lived 16 steps from us since Celine marched off to college with a ponytail and a box of trophies. "Lemon squares," she said, and her eyes slid to the stairs, where Celine hovered like a hostess, waiting for a camera flash. "Mrs. Gallagher, you're too kind," Celine poured, smile-pinned. Reporters cause so much excitement. The practice speech came smooth until it didn't. Mrs. Gallagher set her jaw and lifted her chin like a woman who has paid off her house and buried half her friends. I saw her carrying boxes to the curb that night, she said. Don't pretend you didn't push her out. Silence took the hallway by the shoulders. Celine's smile fell by pieces. I could almost hear them hit. Orville drifted in with a dish towel like a flag of convenience. Now let's not misinterpret he started, but Mrs. Gallagher raised one palm. I know the sound of a mother's heart breaking on a driveway, she said, and the tremor in her voice was not fear. It was anger, with manners. She put the plate in my hands. The exchange felt like signing a statement. I said nothing. Truth breathes better when it isn't crowded. The console phone rang downstairs. Selene lunged, pressing the speaker icon by mistake. A calm voice filled the stairwell. I'm calling from the Iowa Lottery Claims Office regarding the pending payout. The words were measured the tone built for difficult Tuesdays. We require identification from the purchaser whose name appears on the original ticket and any matching receipt. Until we have that, funds will remain frozen. Orville's eyes cut toward me, the way a man glances at a locked door. Celine's followed quick and glassy. We're compiling documents, she said, bright paint over damp plaster. What's the timeline? Ownership first, the voice answered. Without the purchaser's ID, there is no release. The click at the end sounded like a lid closing. I set the lemon squares on my dresser and lifted my cooling mug. Their commotion fluttered down the staircase like birds that had flown into a window. I did not chase it. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 words: witness, official, heir. The page looked cleaner than it had in months, as if order were its own oxygen. Out front, a car idled and then moved on. Inside, the furnace coughed and caught steady again. Age teaches you to trust steady things. Upstairs, Celine's heels beat a thin march. You lost the receipt, she hurled at Orville. You said you had the envelope. He sounded like a man who wanted the fire without the smoke. I had what you gave me. She's the one who bought the ticket. The word she rung the air like a church bell. Vents carry more than heat. I imagined it sliding down the stairwell and out the draft at the side door to the sidewalk where neighbors cultivate the delicate plant of gossip. I let the sentence sit where it landed. Some truths don't need me to lift them. Gravity does the work. Selene tried to gather the words she had let loose and tuck them back into her voice like hairpins. Orville stepped out to the porch phone, glowing in his palm. From my window, I saw shapes on the street scarves, knit caps, the gentle nodding I recognized from funerals and school board meetings. News doesn't need a microphone here. It rides breath and frost and the way people begin with, well. I closed the curtain not to hide, but to hold the moment steady. Harlan used to say photographs steal a bit of time so we can study it. Curtains can too. Back at my desk, I added times beside my notes. The diary in my drawer, Harlan's neat script careful as carpenter lines, waited like a quiet witness. Position, not panic, I wrote underlining once. Silence isn't an absence, it's a placement. I wasn't refusing to speak. I was choosing where to stand so that when the light finally came, it would hit the right faces. Footsteps softened at my door. Selene leaned on the frame and arranged concern over her features. Mom, she said, using the word the way people use a key on the wrong lock, this is getting blown out of proportion. I looked at the woman who used to practice speeches in the bathroom mirror and the girl who hid a bad report card behind the toaster. I also looked at the person who labeled me an expense and drew a basement square with my name off the corner. Some things I said are exactly the size they are. The line lay between us, not sharp but firm. She blinked first. When she left, I lifted the foil and ate a corner of lemon square tart, bright the sugar catching on the roof of my mouth like sunlight. Outside, a door shut. Inside the house exhaled. I rinsed the plate, dried it, and set it by the door for morning. The notebook lay open to its 3 words. I added one more: patience. Then to no one, and to the dresser scarred by decades, I said, soon they won't be able to hide. The sentence had no anger in it, only weather. Storms don't apologize for forming. They arrive when the air insists. Morning light broke through the blinds with a brittle chill. I bundled myself in my coat and walked toward Murphy's Corner store, the place where most of my quiet routines had unfolded for years. Vernon, the owner, stood already behind the counter, coffee mug steaming beside the register. He saw me step in and gave a look that felt more like recognition than surprise. "I figured you'd be here early," he said softly. His eyes carried no judgment, only steadiness. I explained the call from the lottery office, the request for proof of purchase, the need for logs. Vernon listened without interruption. He nodded once, then leaned down to open a drawer beneath the counter. The point-of-sale system flickered on his screen. Fingers tapping, he scrolled until the date of the drawing appeared. Numbers, times, and codes lined the screen. "There you are," he murmured. "Same numbers you always play." I remember that morning. He clicked print the machine, spitting out a clean receipt copy. He signed his name at the bottom of a statement that matched the record. His kindness felt heavier than the paper in my hands. I left the counter with proof my breath steadier than it had been in weeks. The small office in the back smelled faintly of oil and cardboard. Vernon gestured toward a chair. "One more thing," he said, scrolling through grainy security footage. The timestamp landed on the morning of purchase. There I was, handing him cash, the scratch of coins, the crinkle of the printed ticket. He froze the frame, saved the still, and captured another showing my signature on the receipt. "I'll notarize a statement as seller on duty," he promised, scribbling with his pen. He packed the digital files onto a flash drive, slipping it into a small envelope along with the signed affidavit. "Send this to the lottery case officer and keep copies." I reached for his hand. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave a firm shake. "Truth doesn't need thanks, Marjorie. It just needs daylight." By afternoon, daylight sharpened again, this time through a harsher lens. Back home, I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the bank's fraud investigator sift through months of transactions. His tone shifted from neutral to clipped. "These debit payments to household accounts in your daughter's name? Are you aware?" My pen scratched notes across the page. "No," I said flatly. "And these Zelle transfers regular weekly into joint cards belonging to Orville. Did you authorize them?" "No." He exhaled, professional, yet stern. "We're flagging these as unauthorized. You'll receive formal letters confirming the transactions are frozen pending affidavit. This falls under elder financial exploitation." The phrase stung, not because it was wrong, but because it was true. I jotted it down in block letters. Unauthorized, fraudulent, exploitation. When the email arrived, I opened the attachment carefully. Official letterhead compliance signatures. I printed 2 copies, slid one into the folder that now held Vernon's receipt and affidavit. Piece by piece, the fortress of lies was becoming a file I could touch. Walking down the hallway, I met Celine halfway. Her smile was too wide, her tone too light. "Busy day, Mom?" she asked, eyes scanning my coat as though it might reveal secrets. "Just errands," I answered, steady as stone. I carried the folder beneath my arm without showing a single page. In my room, I stacked the documents carefully, point of sale, log camera still, sworn statement fraud letters. Notebook entry, POS log, plus affidavit, plus bank proof. The pile felt heavier than their laughter, stronger than their commands. Evening settled with the sound of the phone ringing. I answered, voice crisp. On the line, the lottery case officer spoke. "We've received documents from Murphy's store and your notarized statements. The purchaser identity review is underway. Funds remain frozen until final confirmation." I offered the ticket's serial number, then scanned and sent my identification as instructed. The officer's tone grew more formal. "Your documentation is strong. We will notify you once review concludes." After the call, I attached the bank's fraud letters to an email addressed to a legal aid inbox. Subject line, elder, financial abuse, preliminary evidence. I clicked, send the weight of decision firm in my chest. That night, I placed the folder on my dresser beside Harlan's diary. I rested my palm on the cover, feeling his words echo through the paper. The house downstairs hummed with Celine's forced laughter, Orville's muttering, but in my room it was quiet. Final thought proof is a current. Once it moves everything. By dawn, the frost on the lawn looked like ground glass. Voices cut through it. Television voices bright, practiced too loud for a quiet street in Des Moines. I eased the blinds and saw tripods sprouting like metal saplings, a van idling with the station logo sliding across its side, a boom mic tilted toward our porch. Inside the hallway, lights were already on. Celine rushed past my door in a sweater she wears only for photographs, brushing her hair with quick nervous strokes, practicing a smile that shows teeth and no shame. I sat on the edge of my bed and breathed. Proof moves everything I had told myself. Apparently, it also moves cameras. The doorbell began its relentless choreography, ring, knock, ring, until the noise itself felt like a verdict. Celine flung open the door as if she'd planned the moment. Reporters on the stoop leaned forward, hands raised, questions fired like beads from a broken necklace. Are you the winner? When will you claim? How does it feel to have your life changed overnight? Celine lifted her chin. I am the rightful winner, she declared, bright as a jingle. A woman in a navy coat stepped closer, notepad ready. Ma'am, the lottery office confirms a purchaser dispute. They say the logs flag a different name. She lifted a printout inside a plastic sleeve. My first name was visible even from the doorway. The porch air shifted. Lenses tilted. A few cameras drifted past Selena's shoulder and found me a shadow in the foyer, holding the doorframe with one hand. Ma'am, are you Marjorie? A microphone asked as if the object itself could speak. I didn't walk out. I didn't hide. I simply stood where I was, the cold sneaking under my slippers, and let the morning decide who it believed. Show proof of purchase, another reporter said, turning back to Celine. Do you have the receipt? The retailer's statement. Celine's smile thinned. The ticket was in our house, she said too fast. We've been planning renovations, but who bought it? Came the follow-up as clean and sharp as a needle. Off to the side, Orville muttered, This is ridiculous, loud enough for the nearest camera to catch. Doubt moved through the crowd in a visible ripple, like wind combing a wheat field. Phones began buzzing at once, heads bowed to screens. I heard it before I saw it. A reporter reading aloud, Iowa Lottery confirms purchaser identification in progress. Preliminary records list Marjorie as the buyer. Another voice added, Funds remain frozen pending final verification. The microphone swung fully toward me as if pulled by gravity. I didn't step into their circle. I let them reach to the threshold and stop. I only ever wanted honesty. I said every word slow enough to land. No speech, no victory pose. Just the truth spoken at porch-light level. Celine's face drained. The smile she had rehearsed found no place to stand. Inside the house, the air felt different, thinner and cleaner at once. I closed the door gently, a small sound that still managed to quiet the room. The reporters kept talking to the wood. I walked to the dining table where sunlight makes a square each morning. I placed Harlan's diary on the left and the evidence folder on the right. The contrast steadied me, memory beside proof, love beside law. I opened my notebook and wrote in a line I underlined twice. Truth speaks loudest when spoken softly. In the kitchen, Orville rattled a drawer and swore under his breath. Celine paced phone to her ear, chasing a version of the story that no longer fit. I poured tea and waited for my hands to stop shaking, though I knew the tremor was not fear. It was the body learning a new balance after months on a tilted floor. The doorbell rang again. I didn't go. I had already said what mattered, and the rest would come in. Writing emails, statements, decisions, signed by people whose pens carry weight. Out the window, I could still see the trucks, the cables snaking over our grass, the neighbors pretending to fetch mail they had already collected. The fortress Celine built out of image and insistence had a gate now, and the gate was open. This house is no longer their fortress. I whispered the words, tasting like something returned rather than stolen. I set my palm over Harlan's name and felt the warmth pass between paper and skin. Outside, the cameras kept humming, hungry for the next update. Inside, I folded the diary closed and slid the folder on top like a roof meeting its walls. Even when walls fall, battles shift. Doors lead to courthouses. Voices turn into filings, and a storm was just beginning. The Poe County Courthouse rose out of the slush like a ship of limestone. I arrived before the crowds, Harlan's diary tucked into my bag, not evidence, only ballast. The marble foyer smelled of wax and winter coats. Celine and Orville swept past me in coats they wear to look important, their attorney pacing between them, rehearsing lines. Flashbulbs popped. Someone asked if we were ready for justice. I answered with a nod and kept walking. My hands were steady because the paper in my folder was steady receipts logs and letters, each page a small spine holding me upright. In Division 3, the benches filled with neighbors pretending they had business here. I sat behind my lawyer, Mr. Haley, who reads quiet and argues cleaner than new glass. Across the aisle, Cellini's counsel stood and painted me as a generous mother who later regretted her gift, a tale about changing one's mind after a windfall. He smiled at the judge like a man selling a boat he doesn't own. When it was our turn, Haley stayed seated and let the documents speak one by one, retailer's log, still images with timestamps, the clerk's affidavit, my identification, the chain of custody that never left my hands. Celine's side moved to clarify intent. Out came a sheet of lined stationery from a floral notepad I recognized from my kitchen drawer. Celine held it by the corner as if it were fragile and holy. My mother wrote this the day she bought the ticket, her lawyer announced. The words on it said, "I wanted my daughter to enjoy life's blessings, and that the ticket is a gift to you, sweetheart." I felt the room tilt and right itself. The judge adjusted his glasses. Miss Marjorie's signature appears inconsistent with examples on file from her driver's license and bank records, and no witness attests to its creation. Haley rose. "Your Honor, the lottery's purchaser review does not weigh intent against a forged note. It weighs evidence of purchase. Still, if intent is at issue, we will speak to conduct." He opened a thin folder. "We call Miss Lena Ortiz from Heartland Bank's fraud unit." Celine's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Miss Ortiz walked to the stand with the professional calm of a person who has seen numbers lie and knows how to make them tell the truth. Sworn in, she explained how my Social Security deposits were siphoned into cards and household accounts bearing Celine's name through recurring drafts and late-night mobile transfers. And to be clear, Haley asked, were these transfers authorized by Miss Marjorie, Miss Ortiz? Consulted her ledger. We have affidavits to the contrary and flags consistent with elder financial exploitation. She described the pattern the days my check arrived, the same day withdrawals, the late-night Zelle bursts that emptied what remained. She did not need to describe the feeling. The math carried it. When Haley finished, the courtroom felt colder, larger, almost echoing. Celine stared at the table as if searching a blank wall for a hidden seam she could slip through. Orville studied the exit sign like a man memorizing a map. We broke for lunch. In the hallway, a line formed for coffee that tasted like paper cups. Mrs. Gallagher squeezed my hand and said, "Keep breathing." Another neighbor said he'd pray for a fair ruling. I told him prayers were already working on the small things like my sleep. Across the way, Celine stood too close to Orville's voice, pitched tight. "Why didn't you tell me the bank could testify?" he hissed back. "Why didn't you tell me about handwriting?" Their lawyer held both palms up a referee with no whistle and no clock to stop the game. A deputy wheeled in a cart of files, and an old clock on the wall ticked with the stubborn patience of Midwest winters. I watched the second hand crawl and let my breathing match it in for 4 out for 4. In a pocket of quiet, I pictured Leora's small hand on mine last weekend, the way she whispered, "Grandma, you're brave." It wasn't armor, but it was warmth, and warmth makes steel workable. I sent her mother a short message asking to see Leora after court. I received no reply, only the gray bubble of nothing, the kind that says a message was seen but not answered. When we reconvened, the judge asked a single question. Neither side could predify. who paid cash to the clerk at Murphy's Corner store at the time, shown here. He tapped the exhibit. Silence gathered, then settled on me like a shawl. I did, I said. No flourish, no sermon? And did you intend to give legal ownership of that ticket away? No, Your Honor. He nodded once, as if the court itself had exhaled. He took the forged note between two fingers, as though it might stain the bench, and placed it face down among the exhibits, as if the paper itself carried a blush of shame. The afternoon ended without a ruling. Tomorrow, the judge said. We rose. The room scraped chairs and boots. In the corridor, I found a bench that remembered every person who had sat to gather strength. I sat with Harlan's diary in my lap and watched dust dance in a shaft of late light. Truth walks slower than lies, but it never stumbles. I tightened my scarf and stood to go. Outside, the air bit my lungs and tasted clean. I was tired to the bone, but the kind of tired that follows work done with both hands and a spine held straight. On the steps, I paused and looked back through the glass at the quiet courtroom. The flags hung like tired shoulders. I thought of every woman I've known who kept a shoebox of receipts because love can be rewritten while numbers cannot. I touched the folder's edge, thanked Harlan under my breath, and promised myself sleep. Tomorrow asks the same thing I kept walking on. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polish, a mixture that settled into my chest like a held breath. I sat in the pew with Harlan's diary in my hands, my fingers tracing its worn cover as if it could pulse life back into me. The air was taut with waiting. Celine leaned toward her lawyer, whispering with the ferocity of someone drowning and blaming the water. Orville stared at the floor, his hands clasped knuckles pale, refusing to meet her eyes. The judge's bench loomed above us, all the gavel resting like a stone. My breath kept time with the clock. One more day of silence, and then truth would speak. The judge entered robe, billowing slightly, glasses perched low. The shuffle of the room hushed into stillness, his voice cut through like steel. This court has reviewed the evidence presented. One by one, he named them: the receipt from Murphy's Corner store, the surveillance stills timestamped the sworn affidavit of the clerk, the bank records revealing exploitation. His words weighed heavy but fair. Then came the sentence that felt like air breaking open. The rightful purchaser of the ticket in question is Marjorie Whitman. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The room filled with murmurs, gasps, rising like a tide. Celine slumped into her chair, her eyes burning her hands, clenching at nothing. The gavel struck once, sealing the words into record. Relief surged through me, not loud but steady like a river finally released. The courtroom broke into chaos. Reporters scrambled for the doors, their heels clattering against marble as they ran to file the headlines. Mother wins case daughter exposed. I could already hear the whispers taking shape. Celine snapped, turning on Orville, her voice cracking like brittle glass. You should have covered the tracks. You ruined everything. He shrugged his face hard with resentment. Their lawyer pressed his briefcase shut, avoiding their storm. The judge rapped his gavel again for order, but the noise of collapse had already begun. A bailiff stepped forward, escorting Celine and Orville out as their fury echoed through the chamber. The fortress they had built was rubble now in front of strangers who would never forget. Outside the courthouse, the winter light lay soft on the steps. Neighbors stood waiting, some with small smiles of pride, others simply watching history pass. Reporters swarmed cameras, flashing like sparks in a dry field. I walked steadily, my coat buttoned, my folder tucked close. A young journalist pushed through, microphone shaking in her hand. Do you have any message, Mrs. Whitman? I paused, turned to her, and answered softly. Truth always stands. The words hung in the cold air, simple as a breath. Cameras captured Selena's absence, her shadow falling behind me as I kept moving forward. At home that evening, I lit a single candle beside Harlan's diary. Its flame flickered steady against the February dark. I set the evidence folder beside it, no longer needed, but not yet put away. Around me, the house felt different, as if the walls had exhaled. I thought of the long silences I had endured, the insults I had swallowed like bitter pills. Each one had become part of the proof that carried me here. I whispered into the stillness. This isn't just about money. It's about being seen. My voice did not tremble. It filled the room with a peace I had not felt in years. The candle burned low. I touched the diary's cover one last time, as if thanking Harland for standing with me in words and memory. My eyes closed and opened again, and the world looked sharper, brighter. I was not erased, not invisible. The silence that had once caged me now felt like a tool I had wielded well. I breathed deeply, my shoulders light. The end was not thunderous. It was steady, dignified mine. I began as their shadow, but I end as myself. Looking back, I see how silence, patience, and truth carried me through storms I never asked for. My story isn't just about a lottery ticket or a courtroom. It's about dignity, resilience, and the courage to stand even when others try to erase you. Life will test us sometimes, through the people closest to us. But strength comes from knowing our worth and refusing to let betrayal define us. What do you take from my journey? Have you ever faced a moment when staying calm and steady turned the tide for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a 1 in the comments if this touched your heart, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more stories that speak to the challenges and triumphs of family, faith, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss what comes next.